Welcome back to Inside Personal Growth. This is Greg Voisen, the host of Inside Personal Growth. And joining me, where are you joining me from, Simon?
I'm actually in Montana now.
Mo- Montana. Whereabouts in Montana? Whitefish?
No, Billings.
Billings.
Yep, absolutely. Yellowstone Medical Center.
Okay, Yellowstone Medical Center. And we're going to be speaking with Simon about his new book called Healthcare Anonymous: Put Yourself First to Avoid Anxiety, Addiction, and Burnout. And is it Maltais? Did I say it right?
Maltais.
Maltais. Is that
Yep.
French?
Yes, sir.
Okay. My last name is French too, but no one ever says Voisen. So I
Yeah.
am Maltais. All right. So this is a book that for all of my listeners, you can go to the website. It's pretty easy if you want to learn more, but it's healthcareanonymous.com. We'll have a link to that website as well. But it's really about the critical issue of what he calls healthcare disease. And we'll get into that during the interview. I'm going to tell my listeners a bit about you. Simon is an active cardiac surgeon and one of the world's largest provider of healthcare services, born in Quebec, Canada. He's a French Canadian and board certified from Canada in cardiac surgery. He further has a doctorate degree in biomedical engineering and heart regeneration. He is internationally recognized leader in the field of heart transplantation, medical heart devices, and alternative cardiac interventions. Before 40, he was raised to lead two world-renowned programs in his specialty and has among the youngest promoted associate professors at the nationally recognized institution. He's a frequent keynote speaker. He's published more than 160 articles. He's contributed to numerous books. He also has worked on 2 different countries in the healthcare systems. So he's uniquely qualified to speak about this, considering his schedule is not only super busy and packed and filled with, as he says in the book, anxiety, addiction, and burnout and stress. So we're going to be talking about that. You know, Simon, in the introduction to your book, you tell a story about yourself, and you paint a picture of a physician who was, basically burnout, stress, and on the brink of, you just couldn't do it anymore. It was a really interesting intro, and all for my listeners, definitely. You state that you almost gave up your life to save ours, meaning the people that were that you're treating. Can you tell a story and what pushed you to this brink? There are a lot of physicians out there, and I'm sure a lot of them get to this point, but they don't want to talk about it. And I think what you're doing is breaking open the yolk and the egg and saying, hey, community, let's talk about it.
Right. No, it's been, well, thank you for the invitation, Greg. I really appreciate it. And it's certainly been a journey. And I was just talking with a friend recently about the book, and more of a less in an informal way, and how this all came together. And I guess it really started really early, where med school was a rat race, residency was a rat race, meaning a race to always be the best, always reach the heights, publish, be on meetings, be the center of attention. Exactly like you see it in those shows on TV, right? So it felt like a sprint until I'd say about 5 years ago. I'd say that I was a pretty good contender of Olympic sprinting. Let's say I was very good at it, was publishing a lot, and then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but progressively, there was a little bit of things that I've noticed that were happening. I got frequent visits to HR. Was angry. I was heavier physically. Getting to work was a bit harder, and it was all not all together, but sort of progressively. A big part of that process was empathy. I started less caring about patients' issues or complications. It always was their fault if they had a complication. They were too sick, or they were And so there was things that I noticed were changing. I didn't like operating anymore. It was more of a job. And so I was tired of being on planes. I was getting through divorce. And so there was just a lot of things happening. And I couldn't just find a common denominator. And I started to write, and that, I mean, writing meaning for myself. I mean,
Right.
so one of the things I've learned during at the time therapy was that you need to write when it goes well and when it doesn't go well. And so it wasn't going well, so I started to write, and then that's how the book really came along. That was the 2 years ago. That was the initiation. That was the start of a process where I started to think about what environment I was in and how I was conditioned to always do more, and then that's how I learned it. That's how I was functioning into it. I couldn't say no, and I thought that was the only way to do it. I mean, I was at the Mayo Clinic. I was the vice chair of the department. I was not even 40 then, and I was more published than people that have 65 years of, years old and have been in practice for 30 years. But then
When did you sleep, Simon? I mean, you obviously didn't get much sleep, and did you meditate, and did you keep a
I didn't
gratitude
do any of
journal?
that stuff. No, I didn't
Yeah.
do any of that stuff. I was drinking to go to sleep. I was a lot of times tired in the morning, getting up. I talk about it in the book. I'm for many years. I just fell to sleep. I mean, not fell to sleep. I just crashed to sleep. I mean,
Right. Right.
uh, and just fell and woke up in the morning at 4 a.m. and continued to work and got up to work at 5 and just felt normal until it didn't. Right.
Right. Right. Right. It caught up with you.
It caught up with me.
Yeah.
So I couldn't function anymore. I was drinking to sleep and drinking quite a bit. And you're right when you talked about it in the introduction. It's not something, especially as a male. I mean, I know this male female conversation is always difficult, but I mean, charged with a lot of things socially, I guess. But being a male in heart surgery and medicine and going through depression, because that's what I had, addiction with alcohol, and having the the willingness and or the need to talk about it wasn't that easy because
Well, I mean, look, in the community, you face a lot of repercussions when you become public like you have, and I want to give you credit. The community of support around you, other doctors, nurses, hospital administrators, whatever, they all need to be supporting someone like yourself. And there is a stigma attached to a young male like yourself kind of coming out about burnout, stress, whatever, right? And I'm sure you saw this in many of your colleagues as well, but they weren't as bold as you are. And I want to give you credit. And so let's talk about this a little bit. You know, in your estimation, why does healthcare disease, as you call it, exist? You mentioned many of the things like being a resident, how things happen in the hospitals and all the rest of it. And you state that the true landscape is that we are ill-equipped to take care of the strangers at the expense of our own personal deficit. And we practice in a culture that shames weakness. So that's one big clue right there. What needs to change in your estimation to eliminate healthcare disease?
well, I mean, it's a complex definition, right? So you pointed out a few things. I describe in the book some path to understanding the disease, and the way I describe it is it's usually a combination of things. When you get sick, it's not only one thing. Usually, it's when you're let's say you catch an infection, it's the infection being in a susceptible host and that has within a special environment, either hot or cold. And so when you have this disease, the burnout, the depression, the addiction, that's the acute moment where it manifests itself. But there's a process for which over many years you yourself develop characteristics, traits that are sometimes imposed too early. You know, you spend your 20s, 15 years studying and you're faced with death, you're faced with mortality, you're faced with heavy schedule, not sleeping, and you're only like 22 years old. And so these character traits are really forced into you, where you're really not mature enough to really understand them. So that's one. And so there's that. There's this medical notion that you always have to perform, the perfectionism and ego becomes a big part of who you are. So that's the host. So there's things related to yourself that are important. Then there's the environment, and so there's things about the system like the work hours, the demand, the number of cases, the changes over years that have happened in the system to force on us changes to meaning we need to reach a certain quota for surgery, we need to generate a certain amount of money, and that's all tracked. And so the movement towards administrative management of medicine or monetizing medicine from the last, let's say, 20 years has really had an impact on the provider. And so the environment is also it's exactly at times how you see it in the movies again,
Right.
those shows, and then there's the way you start interacting with them. And so when those three, and so that means your ability to say no, your ability to manage your schedule, your ability to cope with death and things. And so that becomes your sort of interaction with it. And so when the host has a problem, when the environment is tough, and then your ability to cope with it is over many years wrongly equipped, that's where you sort of have these moments where then the depression. And so when people say burnout in high intensity environment or healthcare, it's the end result, in my opinion, and that's what the book is all about, of showing that burnout and depression and addictions are the end result of this complex those complex interactions over many years that have been imposed or learned,
almost like it's the perfect firestorm, what you just talked about. Yet on the other hand, it's like this quote from the Buddha: there's suffering and then there's the end of suffering, but we create our own suffering. This is a podcast on personal growth,
right?
So all these listeners out there they're not judging, they're saying it's a unique position that Simon got into. Simon's the only one that can get out of it. And no one else, and this isn't a judgment either, no one else is kind of to blame for where we go, and that's called self-responsibility. In other words, I take responsibility for it. I get that when you go in the healthcare field, you got to make money for the hospitals and the system. You got a schedule to keep. You got people that basically, when your phone goes off or you get a text and you got to go to an emergency, you've got to do that. But you also, as you found out, have to kind of slow down and take care of yourself. Because if you don't take care of you, number one, you're going to be no good to nobody else.
Absolutely.
Zero good. The drinking, the this, the that, everything that happened to you. You're a perfect poster child for probably what's happening in many cases. And you state that the Healthcare Anonymous is an open-hearted book carrying this visection of the illness that is real and worth talking about. How difficult has it been for you to express your own feelings about this epidemic in the healthcare community? And I would presume that it is, but it's kind of a quiet one. It's like a under wrestling one,
Yeah, it's not easy because it's admitting. I mean, especially for a guy like me whose ego was bigger than everybody else. I think it takes a certain humility, and there's a difference between trying to be humble and try to explain things that have happened to you. So true humility is when you decide to speak for the greater good, and that when that switch has happened for me to say, listen, I'm not say if I sell 0 book, I don't really care about it. I mean, to me, it's a message that is bigger and actually extends to more than healthcare, because a lot of people are suffering out there in environments like this. I mean, I have a friend who I was just talking to as a former athlete. I mean, any high intensity environment where you're sort of forced into a lot of those things that you have to perform, where you have to be perfectionist, we have to exercise some perfectionism, are to some extent that have the common themes. And so starting to speak up about it, like you hear for, I think it's Simone Biles, during the Olympic, or some of that sort of real true vulnerability is not easy. And I'm a better doctor than I am now than I was doing 400 cases a year, trying to just crank to be the best, that the world has ever seen. People now I know my patients. I have plan A, plan B, plan C. It's not just a factory. It's so in some ways, it is sort of a way it was very difficult, but then as the growth process occurs through self-care, through self-responsibility, throughout the journey, then you realize after a while that you really transform into something different. And my interaction, the way I work now, I wished I would have known that 10 years ago, and some part of my training and some part of my of me evolving within the system, and that's the same thing within a company or within sports or within part of me would have liked to know what I know now. And so that was the intent of the book, to try to describe something that was bigger than myself. And as I sort of did that, and it became easier to express, what I went through.
Well, this is your own healing journey, let's face it. And you do want to sell books because you want people to hear the message. Yet on the other hand, what's most important is Simon's journey, right? And I question for you, and I'm sure through all of your therapy that you've gone through, this has been brought up. But hey, look, this is a podcast show. I have hundreds of thousands of people that go through never being enough. I don't know when that occurred for you, but for the most part, somewhere, parents, school, something, usually people like you that are that driven. I know because I had the same disease. Okay. But I had to learn how to repair it to be able to live with myself, because the ego was big, the issues were big, the pain, the anxiety attacks I was having, real in elevators, couldn't go see clients because these anxiety attacks would think, and I was thinking I was having a heart attack. And, look, I've been through all of it. But the one thing that did calm me was I went to Scripps in La Jolla, and they put all these electrodes all over my head, and they put them on my hands and fingers, and I could see the attack. I saw it on the screen. It was real. It's like, this is what's going on. Your heart rate's going up, your blood pressure's going up, all that. And I started meditating way back, and I never stopped. And I never had another anxiety attack after that.
Yeah.
So my question to you is, have you identified at what point in your life you weren't enough because you had to excel and be better and always, write 160 articles versus, 25 articles? So what was that you identified? Because you must know now.
Yeah, I think I've hit it was progressive again. I try to really I was going to bring up that concept. We become in these high intensity environment where you have to study, you have to practice a lot, where you have to, engage yourself fully into your work. You have this thing called, in the book I talk about, but delayed gratification becomes a really big factor. And let me explain what that means. But you always, and that's a bit what you were saying, you become expert at saying, I'll be happy when I publish
right when I
100%.
sell a million books. I'll be happy when I find the perfect wife. I'll be happy when whatever.
I'm going out with this model, or I'm going to be happy when I have these 3 cars. And so, but that, I mean, just in healthcare in general, that's how you learn in med school how to function. That's how your brain functions, because they tell you, even in med school, like you, and then I'm sure it's a lot of that for nurses and other professions, just talking to people, is that they tell you this is an investment. You study 100 hours a week, because in 4 years you'll be done. You'll have the MD, and then all the doors are opening up.
Yeah.
And they don't really.
Just started. You just started.
It just started, and they don't. And you finish the residency, and then you'll make tons of money, and you'll pay all these debts back, and so you become, and that translates into your life again in a lot of other areas. You're like, well, I'll be happy when I go on vacation in 3 weeks. I'll be happy when my wife gets this done, whatever. So you become expert at doing that. And so when I realized that, that's where the healing process started for me. And then to your question more specifically, and then when I realized that, understanding that allowed me to become more in the present. So it comes back to your meditation, this sort of mindfulness ability to sort of come back to the present. I do now, realizing that when I was angry at work, it wasn't normal. Like, it was anger is not normal. It's a reflection of, it's an emotion that you can't contain, right? So it's the same thing as crying or anything. So if you're at work angry all the time, it's because there's a deeper thing. So once I realized that there was this deeper issue, that I was an expert in delayed gratification, that some of the things, were upon me to correct, and that started healing. And it took, I hit the point where I just hit the cliff. I couldn't do the work. That probably 2 or 3 years ago, where I got divorced. I was 60 pounds heavier. I had all these responsibilities. I was the chair of this, president of that, on a paper every 2 weeks, student teaching, teacher of the year. I just had so much stuff going on. And yet I had the feeling that I wasn't accomplishing enough,
Well, and Simon, that because you've studied this, the anger does nothing to help your own heart.
Absolutely.
So, you've seen plenty of people come in that you've done surgeries on, and if you were to probably profile them, you would find there was lots of anger somewhere along the way. I interviewed Ram Dass, so I throw this up. Be here now. This sits on my desk, and I have a now clock on my wall that you can't see, but there's actually no time on it. It basically just says now, right? And I always remember what Ram Dass would say about that, and it is so important. God bless him; he's now deceased, but the journey he went on to actually explore and to find that, and it isn't for everybody, but what is for everybody is a middle path. If you're going to go down this road, there's the body, as you've studied in that enough, it seeks homeostasis. Right. It's like, okay, I want to come back to the middle ground. Great, I can go exert myself and ride my bike 100 miles, or I can climb Mount Everest. I'm doing a book right now with another author on Everest. It's climbed it 3 times. The reality is to live, sometimes you have to face death. I know that's a conundrum, but to really live life, you face death. I know you've had plenty of patients that have faced death. They've come back. And the question is, are they living their life? And my next question is you were told by a friend and a mentor, John Byrne, that there's a very fine line between confidence, overconfidence, and arrogance. You state that you recognize that these traits would become the source of your most significant personal and professional failures. Can you explain the challenges you have had as a heart surgeon in trying to balance your life and understanding how important those traits are?
Yeah, I'd say, again, I'm sorry I make those comparisons quite a bit. In order to make a performance or to achieve a certain level of expertise in anything, you do have to have confidence. You do have to have, I mean, when I do surgery, that's published data. There's hundreds of decisions a minute that I take, and I take one path and instead of the other to heal someone, and during an operation for 4.5 hours that will lead to a favorable outcome. And so if I hesitate for every one of those decisions, if someone fibrillates, if someone codes during a surgery, or someone have to redo a bypass, or there's a valve that don't work, or there's a problem with the heart and lung machine, if I hesitate in that process, then it will lead to different outcome. And so for me, for a heart surgeon, it's a bit of a harder field to understand, because in medicine, I mean, everything has emergencies, but when things don't go well for us, it's pretty devastating for patients. The heart don't work, and not a whole lot of things work. Right. And so you need to, it's just like someone who goes to the Olympics and trains for how long to perform, right? So you do have to have this ability to lock it in and make decisions. Now, it's I call it the God complex in the book, but this ability really is pretty close to some other traits that are not quite as favorable for in general, meaning this God complex where you feel like you're invincible. You feel like it's easy to get into those mindset, because your job entails so much decision making, so that you become in your everyday life a bit this sort of automated robot that works in the same way, right? So and that's where the confidence switches to arrogance a little bit, where you need to shove your opinion and your ideas and your way of thinking onto everybody, and then even further, then the perception changes. So there's confidence, overconfidence, and an arrogance, where then the perceived the way you're acting is perceived by others to be all for you, or for all for your own benefits. And that's where I think this is a moving line that's very hard to make, specifically for people that work in this very high intensity environment. And then for me, it was always about being the best, about perfectionism, about, there was no way I was going to go in any other specialty than heart surgery, because it was the pinnacle of surgery, of medicine. It was like making life or death decision, and it just fitted my personality. But now retrospectively, it really doesn't, because I'm not I'm not like this. And so I wish in med school there would be a better way to fit in people into what they truly are, because I mean, I'm a loving individual. I'm someone that has a lot of friends. I'm social. I tend to be a bit soft, when people really know me, like my wife or close friends. And so when I came to work, it was this part of me that just switched into like beast mode, not at the, and so I needed to accomplish. I needed to like be always on top of things. And so that part to me, and then what I did, you can leave work, you can change work. For me, then it was to find a job now that fulfills my interests, that fulfills a certain like level of decision making like this, but that is much less of a high intensity work, so that it doesn't bring out this part of me that is just hard to work with.
Well, you're juggling a lot, and I can't hardly even imagine what it must be like. But being an actor on the stage of life, you've got a role as a husband, you got a role as a physician, you've got a role as maybe a father, whatever it might be, but you're playing a role. And what you're having to do is shift up those roles. And the one role you play as a physician, the way you're explaining it, was extremely stressful. You had to come in making decisions. And how do you explain away in your own life as a physician, you're not going to save every patient, and you're going to have questions as you left. Well, if I had made a right turn, it would have been better, or a left turn, I would have done something. Right. How much is it that your spirituality, fate, whatever you want to big it up to, because you've got to go on to the next case. You've got to tell the wife and the kids that the dad didn't make it, or whatever it might be, or grandpa didn't make it, or grandma, or whatever. And I can't imagine that, but how do you reconcile that in your own mind? Because it's not like Simon did anything wrong. Simon did everything he could. It just didn't work. That happened. I mean, I hate to say it, but like shit happens. And the reality is you have to have, as a physician, I think, some way to explain it. What would you tell our audience? Because that's got to be a very unique position to be in.
Yeah, it's weird because and then you're asked to do that too, right? You're sort of faced with life or death commonly in what we do in emergencies and things, and sometimes some of those decisions lead to a bad outcome, and and so the way I'll answer this in twofolds. The way I've I've decided to live this for myself is that if I make the decisions that put the patient first, meaning that it's not about the hospital finances, that it's not about the way I feel, it's not about the perceived perception. As long as I'm trying to do what's best for the patient, and that includes knowing the literature, that includes doing the pre-op assessment correctly, that includes telling them or having them understanding the risk of a certain intervention, having them on board with the surgery. So as long as I do that right, and I feel like during the surgery I've performed the best of my ability because I'm not stressed, because I'm not sleep deprived, because I'm not hangover,
Right.
I feel like in my mind I can live with that. Now, then to answer your question now, how do I deal it when it happens, when things don't go well? The classic behavior is and that's where every failure happens, or every miscontent you have at work, is to ignore it. That was pretty easy. Before I didn't sit with it. I've had death. I mean, recently a couple of patients in a row, and very tough cases, and or bad aortic rupture that died in the operating room, or we have to call in the family. I would typically leave the room. I would be like acting like, gosh, I really did everything I could. You guys deal with that now. He didn't make it. I'm out, And it really, and it didn't occur to me that I would learn and the family would appreciate it if and that would sort of help me secondarily if I would sit with it. And sitting with it is not trying to explain to people what you did wrong. It's something. It's just to be there and just and sit with the emotions, sit with the pain, sit with the suffering. And I realized over the last, and that's been more recent, I'd say the last 24 months, where I really exercised that sort of this behavior of sitting with things, that oftentimes the transition for families is much easier, and because they see the humanity. And actually at the end of those moments, oftentimes I find that the family is actually consoling me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I've actually grown into this to say, you know what, like and then I stayed in the operating room last. Like I remember one specific event 2-3 years ago where a patient died in the operating room. It's awful because the family comes, it's sterile, it's cold, they come and see behind the curtains their family members who just died and swollen and after a big surgery. And I remember after we all prayed together and things in the room, I just stayed there with them in the corner. And I still receive letters every year from that family of, thank you. We really had a good transition. It was a tough moment. So I would say, in any conflicts like this or any big event, and it took me years to understand. I mean, I'm like 20 some years. I mean, I'm 15 years in practice, but I've done this now for 20 some years. It took me, when you think about it, 18 years plus to not just be the passing by strategist, that just say, okay, everything's gone now. I've done my job. Let's move on. But part of your job is helping family transition to comfort and to get over a certain thing too, because you didn't really save and then that really helped me getting over those tragic moments.
Well, I think, look, like you, I don't have as many degrees as you do, but one of the degrees I have is in spiritual psychology. And I have some friends that are chaplains, and I understand the importance of that healing time. And what you're doing is healing you as much as it's, as you said, healing them. And it allows you to continue, and pardon me for saying this, but I'll use the word craft. You're like an artist. I used to have plastic surgeon clients, and they would have the pictures of the people that they're going to fix and how they're going to fix them, and how they're going to do their artwork, right? How they're going to make this happen. And I think what you do is even more difficult because of the intensity of what you're under and keeping someone alive. But what you're doing now is really important. And you speak about, again, this healthcare system has changed over the years and how it has contributed to the burnout of residents. You were once a resident. I'm sure you can remember back to that. What are the factors that you believe lead to the burnout, and what can hospitals and the healthcare industry do to change the problems? And you listed on page 50 in the book, I even put a P50 on there, these things, because we have many listeners. We're going to have people like Quint Studer listening to this, and we're going to have people that are nurses listening to this, or other doctors listening to this. From Simon's perspective, what do you think needs to happen?
Yeah, I think so. A lot of things are already happening. I think there is a movement now for that residents and students are burnout, and then there's 60% of residents in cardiac surgery plus that fitted in this most recent study criteria for depression while in training, right? That's huge, right? Mm-hmm. And so now there's working hours restrictions. You can't be, we used, when I was training, you could do 100 and some hours a week plus. There was no restriction on that. You could be on call all night, not sleep, and you couldn't go home in the next morning. You would never ask to go home in the morning because that was your time to do surgery,
So it's like airline pilot now. You can't just keep flying.
No, you can't keep flying, but it was an unknown, it was like an unsaid rule before, where if you left in the morning at 8 after a night call and you were scheduled to do surgery the next day, your ability to find a job was going to be zero. Because people would sort of put you in this sort of bucket of people that, are not working hard enough, And so now that's changed. I think, their call needs to change as well. Those moments where you serve, and you're sort of at the mercy of a call or beeper. By definition, right, the call is sort of a risk factor for burnout. You're working many hours at night, you're sleep deprived. The acronym HALT, right? You're hungry all the time. Finding food is sort of it becomes a challenge. You eat and it's too much work to do. So you're hungry all the time. You're angry all the time because you get to be caught up in the system. You're lonely because oftentimes it's like at night, right? Mm-hmm. And you're tired. So HALT is what they use in these addictions. HALT is an acronym that they use for rehab, right? If you get into this HALT, system, so realizing that that's an important factor for burnout, for people that have been, struggling, and then you can act upon those things. You can respectfully and professionally ask for a schedule and put certain limits to your schedule. I think hospitals need to hire more people. We need to continue forcing on that. Sometimes providing lunches is to provide help. We've done some changes where I work, where we provide some meditation every week. We provide some lunches, healthy stuff. Just realizing that the call and the work that we do at times is just not normal. And I think, and not normal, meaning not 9 to 5, not sort of a time where people need to have dedicated time to eat. And we shouldn't resent as a culture people for wanting to do that. And teach perhaps in school tricks and tips how to survive, in a call, or how to survive on a night shift. And I think it's a complete disaster. My ex-wife, who's now is a great friend, she's which is an accomplishment in itself. But now that I think about it, but the her schedule still in the nursing. If you don't have like a history at this hospital, if you're a specialized nurse, you basically start over at night again, right? Like you were 18 years old, whatever, so that doesn't make sense to me. You're trying to attract people with experience. You tell them up front, you know what, you gotta do, for 3 years, you gotta do from the night shift. How does this compatible with life? And so I think the system needs to think it differently. They say, well, maybe we rotate, everybody does it, and it's not, if you haven't been there for 20 years, you can just choose the shift before everybody's, during the day, and then you let
the thing, Simon, that we know there's a healthcare shortage of healthcare workers, right? It's just, and then the pandemic just exasperated it, and it exasperated your heart surgery even more because they were postponed. And that kind of leads me to this next question. You speak in the book about the overall decline of cardiac surgery in the US and the increase of the mortality after cardiac or artery bypass surgery during pandemic and because of the postponement. Look, people weren't going in for, quote, voluntary surgeries. I can't imagine that the coronary bypass surgery is voluntary, but to some degree it is, I'm sure. How did the pandemic exacerbate the problem, and what has the fallout been to physicians like yourself because of the pandemic? And we can speak about it in general terms, but you can speak about it also specifically as it relates to your profession as a heart or cardiac surgeon.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing delayed presentations. People wait longer, when they have chest pain to show up, and time is money, for the heart. So if you have chest pain and have a heart attack, I mean, if you show up later, it limits our ability. If often patients are sicker, the heart has had damage, and so that's for sure one factor. When people get short of breath, they oftentimes, I mean, what we see is now the go-to reflex is to say, oh, that's COVID. I'm coughing, I'm short of breath. That's COVID. And we now see that, I mean, that's the main symptoms for us, right? People have valve problem, they have a heart attack, and so shortness of breath oftentimes is missed. People have been in the hospital somewhere being treated for, COVID, quote unquote pneumonia. And then we realize that heart's the problem 2 weeks later, and they've been in the ICU and things. And so that's and then COVID has brought up a lot of weird stuff too for us, like the blood is more thick. We've had some patients have stroke, and we have had some patients have early occlusion of bypasses, and so that's been a problem too. So I mean, it's changed the practice a little bit, but yet the community doesn't support us, because I do the same thing day in, day out, but people are dying more, so it's it's tough to live through that, and we don't really talk about that much, because in the book, what you're referring to, I talk about this article. They say, well, it's being more difficult, people are dying more, from COVID and from heart surgery after COVID, more than you would expect, but yet nobody talks about what impact this has on teams and on the surgeon. I mean, I remember that week, a couple months ago, where I lost 2 patients the same day of weird stuff, like all the bypasses occluded, and then we find out the patient had COVID a month ago, and then that's probably what the cause is, and then another one having another complication. And yet I was sitting in my office and I was like, God, what am I doing here? Like, what happened? And I was like lost. I had lost confidence. I was sad. And this article, they talk about the impact on residents, on the system, nobody talks about what it has on your mental health, and especially when it's been going on for 2 years, So, and then now we're seeing we're seeing a lot of people, nurses and doctors, saying, "To hell with it. I'm just going to go and do temporary assignments because doing this day in, day out is just not, I just can't do it anymore."
Well, it obviously the pandemic has had a huge impact on the healthcare system, and it's crazy. In kind of wrapping up our interview, though, I want to ask you kind of a twofold question. One, you speak about the psychological manifestations from the healthcare disease, and you tell stories about fellow physicians who are faced with it as well. And your estimation, so the two-part question, how can the healthcare system reinvent itself so that it's more compassionate, understanding, and is a community of support for the brave doctors and surgeons and nurses and other workers in the field? And the second part of that question is, you created a roadmap, a step-by-step program toward recovery. What is that plan, and how can other healthcare professionals avail themselves of your step-by-step program? I know they can go to the website, healthcareanonymous.com. So 2-point question, first part and the second part.
Right. Well, in regards to that first part, I think there's a lot of work within the system to change the culture, to change the perception, to open up the conversation, create a community of support, not just about heart surgeon, but nursing, to favor the sort of long haul, not to make any relation with COVID, but
right,
long haul treatment of the problem, as opposed to treating the acute moment. And I think the system's pretty good about recognizing when people drink too much, when people can't get up, go to work, recognizing the acute moment, but the prevention of it, whether it's facilitating some time, helping people with their kids, at work, and it's not very good about recognizing early problems. And so fostering this, and I think some companies and some tech companies are probably better about doing that, or preventing, or fostering that environment of having a gym, or having good food, or having a Friday jeans, or having, healthcare in that way is healthcare systems in that way
flagging,
old school,
Yeah.
lagging a bit behind.
Yeah.
Favoring, I was just reading this Harvard Business Review on hybrid work, and how most of the tech companies and 90% of them won't go back to the usual sort of getting to work and with your lunch every day and driving through traffic. They've realized that it's more profitable for someone to be on site, when they have to, and then meetings, telemedicine, telecommunication, things have really taken over. Satisfaction has improved. Turnover has decreased. We're complaining about turnover in medicine a lot. People change job. The nurses go. They go to other jobs. First is to pay and reward the experience, but also it's to favoring some of that hybrid models, right? So I have my kids on Friday. I can do the work from home, from telemedicine, and that way the medicine is hard to adapt those cultures. So that's the first one.
Yeah.
And then when it comes, yeah, go ahead.
No, I agree with you. I've worked in the healthcare field, so I understand it. It's old fashioned. It is reinventing itself. I think the culture that it pervades is the biggest factor. And I'm not just the culture with healthcare administrators, but truly, when I say this, hospital administrators, I should say, it's truly pervasive in the whole culture. The cultures have to shift for everything else to shift. And I think they've had a very difficult time trying to do that.
Right. And it's coming back now. Whether people were forced out of the system, now they're asking to come back. I'm very fortunate here, and that's part of the reason why I took the work here. But I have 3 partners who think the same, and are very tech savvy, or very sort of forward into the hybrid work. And so we, among us, have proposed to the hospital, because they were having trouble with keeping people within the system, because people were, changing after 3 or 4 years and things leading to other places.
Yeah.
Listen, we're going to commit to stay here, but here's what we want. We want this time off. We want telemedicine to work. When I'm going to be here, I'm going to operate. I want my time to be optimized, and we're all 3, the same, and focus on. So I'm very fortunate. So people need to propose to their system some more hybrid work like that. And in regards to your second point, I propose in the book a step program, right? It's basically summarizing the things that have helped me. in 5 general steps and then plus one. And so I actually, taking a pause, reassessing values, virus checking yourself on a daily basis, forgiving and not being resentful. So there's a couple of things in there to help people get through a stage if they have these acute moments. And I do open up the conversation. I do give the book room. I actually invited people to give stories about their experience, which I think is going to help a lot of people. It's not just doctors, it's nursing, it's administrators, it's technicians. And so we have family doctors, specialists. And so very helpful. We have a wife that talks about her husband who died. I
remember that story. Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of powerful stuff, but people will recognize themselves. And then what we're trying to do further, I've created a working group called, you can go to breakthroughpoints.com. It's basically a coaching system or a group of people that have gotten together to help people get through and work in a better homeostasis within these high intensity environment, whether it's healthcare, whether it's business, whether it's, and it's the program has a lot of steps, but we follow people 6 months. We propose sort of one-on-one coaching. We have teaching sessions, and because I think a lot of growing comes from understanding the environment and how it works, and then how those people work and what it leads to. So we're trying to create a movement to try to open up a forum. And certainly that is going to be, I think the book is one thing, but it's a stepping stone to creating a movement to help people.
Well, I think you've done a great job of summarizing it for all my listeners out there that are in the healthcare field that want to learn more. Go get a copy of this. He gave 2 websites. We'll put links to both of them. The first one is healthcareanonymous.com. You can learn more about Simon there. He has bonus packages with bundles. So if you want to distribute this to people in the hospital, get 100 copies, circulate it around.
I can come. Actually, I offer a program where we do like a SWOT approach visit to your hospital. So we come and do like a 360 analysis, suggest some things that we can do to improve, the environment and help people and things like that. We do breath work and things like that. So there's information on there to help.
Well, the Breakthrough Points is the other website that we'll put a link to. And, when you talked about breath work, I think I spoke with him. My son just got certified in somatic breathing. He's doing the, Meinhof, Himhof, the guy that goes in the cold water.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and it does work because it works tremendously well. Simon, just a pleasure having you on, speaking about your book, your own personal journey. Usually the stories that people tell are really what they actually bring up in people the best parts, meaning, hey, these are things that, I relate to Simon. I was going through the same thing, or I had a problem with this as well. So for all of you who could relate to Simon's story, you then need to go get the book. You need to go to Breakthrough Points. You need to go to Healthcare Anonymous. Pleasure having you on. Thank you so much. And as we said, be here now. Take a big, deep breath